In this video, we're uncovering the haunting last moments of women who were executed on death row in the United States. These rare but powerful stories shed light on the final meals, last words, and the crimes that led them to the ultimate punishment. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more real-life crime stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Between 1989 and 1990, she shot and killed 7 men along Florida's highways. Her victims were all strangers, men she encountered while working as a hitchhiking sex worker. Wuornos claimed the murders were acts of self-defense, stating the men either raped or attempted to rape her. However, the evidence told a different story. The killings followed a disturbingly similar pattern. She would shoot her victims multiple times at close range, often leaving their bodies in secluded wooded areas or along remote roads. Her first known victim, Richard Mallory, was a convicted rapist, which initially gave weight to her claims of self-defense. But the other 6 men had no known history of sexual violence, which began to unravel her narrative and paint her as a calculated killer rather than a desperate woman fighting back. Police were eventually led to Wuornos after she and her partner, Tyria Moore, were spotted driving one of the victim's stolen cars. Moore later cooperated with law enforcement and agreed to wear a wire to get Wuornos to confess, which she eventually did on tape. Aileen Wuornos was convicted and sentenced to death. Despite numerous appeals, psychiatric evaluations, and intense media coverage, including documentaries and a major Hollywood film, her execution was set for 2002. She famously rejected further appeals, insisting she wanted to die. Last meal. Wuornos was offered the traditional right of a final meal, but she declined anything special. Instead, she simply requested a single cup of coffee. That small choice stood out, an unembellished end to a chaotic life. Final words. As she stood on the gurney awaiting lethal injection on October 9, 2002, Aileen left the world with a strange and cryptic farewell. She said, "I just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus." The rock she referred to was believed to be a nod to her faith in God, while the Independence Day reference, possibly to the sci-fi film, suggested a surreal belief in resurrection or revenge. Her final statement, like her life, left people puzzled, divided, and haunted. Aileen Wuornos remains one of the most studied and debated female criminals in U.S. history. Her case raised deep questions about mental illness, trauma, the justice system, and how society views women who kill. Judy Buenoano. Judy Buenoano earned the chilling nickname the Black Widow for good reason. Her trail of crimes spanned nearly 2 decades and involved cold, calculated murders disguised as tragic accidents. Born Julius Welty in 1943, she later changed her last name to Buenoano, a twisted blend of her husband's surname and the Spanish word for good. But there was nothing good about what followed. In 1971, her husband, James Goodyear, a U.S. Air Force sergeant, suddenly fell ill after returning from a tour in Vietnam. He died shortly after. Doctors initially thought it was natural causes, but more than a decade later, exhumation and testing revealed he had been slowly poisoned with arsenic. Judy collected substantial life insurance payouts. Her next known victim was her own son, Michael. In 1979, he became mysteriously ill and was left partially paralyzed. Then in 1980, she took him canoeing on a river in Florida. The canoe capsized, and Michael, unable to move his arms or legs properly due to his condition, drowned. Once again, Judy collected insurance money. In 1983, her fiancé, John Gentry, was seriously injured when his car exploded in a parking lot. He survived, and the investigation that followed unraveled Judy's web of deceit. Police discovered that she had been giving him pills laced with arsenic and had rigged his car with a homemade bomb. The deeper they dug, the more suspicious deaths were linked to her. In total, authorities tied her to 3 murders and multiple attempted killings, all motivated by greed and a chilling disregard for life. She was sentenced to death for the murder of her husband and received life sentences for other charges. On March 30, 1998, Judy Buenoano became the first woman executed in Florida since 1848 and only the third woman in the U.S. to be executed since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Last meal. Judy's final meal was light and composed of her personal favorites: steamed broccoli, asparagus, fresh strawberries, and hot tea. It was a modest, almost delicate choice, starkly contrasted with the violent ends her victims faced. Final words. As she was strapped into Florida's electric chair, Judy chose not to say a single word. No apology, no explanation, no farewell. She stared straight ahead in silence as the courage through her body. Her execution closed the chapter on one of the most calculated female killers in American history. But the legacy of her crimes continues to haunt those who study justice, manipulation, and the darkest corners of human behavior. Velma Barfield, North Carolina. Velma Barfield holds a dark place in American criminal history. Not only was she the first woman executed in the United States after the Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty in 1976, she was also a trusted caregiver turned serial killer, hiding behind a sweet Southern demeanor. Born in 1932 in South Carolina, Velma's early life was marked by hardship and abuse, but it was her later years that shocked the nation. After her second husband died under suspicious circumstances, more deaths began to follow, quietly, and all within her inner circle. In 1978, her fiancé, Stuart Taylor, suddenly fell ill and died. Traces of arsenic were later discovered in his system. Investigators began to look into other unexplained deaths connected to Velma, including her own mother, Lillian Bullard, who had died mysteriously in 1974. What they uncovered was chilling. Velma had poisoned at least 6 people, 4 of whom she confessed to killing. Most were either elderly people in her care or relatives who trusted her completely. She used arsenic-based rat poison to commit her murders, often slipping it into food or drinks. Her motive? Often money. She stole checks, forged documents, or sought insurance payouts to fuel her addiction to prescription drugs. Her trial gained national attention, especially after she became a devout Christian while on death row. Many people rallied for her sentence to be commuted, including televangelist Billy Graham's wife, Ruth, but the courts did not budge. On November 2, 1984, Velma Barfield was executed by lethal injection at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was the first woman executed in the U.S. in over 20 years, and the first by lethal injection in North Carolina. Last meal. Velma requested a simple, almost childlike final meal: cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. It was a modest and oddly innocent choice, perhaps a small comfort before facing death. Final words. As she lay on the gurney, Velma spoke softly. "I'm sorry for all the hurt I've caused." It was a brief but sincere acknowledgement of the lives she shattered. Whether it was the confession of a redeemed soul or the final act of a lifelong manipulator remains debated. To this day, Velma Barfield's story is remembered not only for the quiet horror of her crimes, but also for the national conversation it reignited about women, capital punishment, and forgiveness. Karla Faye Tucker's case shocked the nation, not just for the brutality of the crime, but for the dramatic transformation she claimed to undergo behind bars. On the night of June 13, 1983, Karla and her boyfriend, Daniel Garrett, broke into a Houston apartment intending to steal motorcycles and parts. Inside were Jerry Dean and Deborah Thornton. What started as a robbery quickly turned into a horrific double murder. Karla, high on drugs at the time, attacked Dean with a pickaxe, striking him repeatedly, even after Garrett had already beaten him. Then, noticing Deborah hiding under a blanket, Karla turned on her too, driving the pickaxe into her body multiple times. In a later interview, Karla admitted that she experienced a disturbing sense of euphoria during the murders, describing it as a sexual thrill, statements that chilled both investigators and the public. She was arrested shortly after and quickly confessed. At her trial, Karla was portrayed as a violent, remorseless killer, and the jury sentenced to death by lethal injection. But that wasn't the end of her story. While in prison, Karla experienced what she described as a spiritual awakening. She became a born-again Christian, began studying the Bible, and started counseling other inmates. Her transformation gained national attention, with many, including religious leaders, celebrities, and even members of the public, calling for her sentence to be commuted to life in prison. They argued that she was a completely different person from the 23-year-old who had wielded the pickaxe. Despite the outcry, then Texas Governor George W. Bush and the court stood firm. On February 3, 1998, Carla Faye Tucker became the first woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. Last meal. Carla's final meal was simple and light: a garden salad with ranch dressing, a banana, and a peach. It was a humble request, nothing extravagant, perhaps a reflection of her spiritual transformation. Final words. Strapped to the gurney, Carla smiled gently at the friends, family, and even guards who had come to witness her execution. Her last words were filled with love and faith. "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. I love you all very much. I will see you all when you get there." She died with a tearful expression of peace on her face. To this day, Carla Faye Tucker's story continues to stir debate. Can someone truly change? Should redemption be enough to spare a life? Her execution marked a defining moment in America's conversation about justice, mercy, and the power or limits of transformation. Lisa Montgomery. Lisa Montgomery's crime is considered one of the most gruesome and disturbing acts committed by a woman in U.S. criminal history. In December 2004, Lisa drove from her home in Kansas to Skidmore, Missouri, under the pretense of buying a puppy from 23-year-old Bobby Jo Stinnett, a pregnant dog breeder she met online. But Lisa had no intention of purchasing a dog. Once inside Bobby Jo's home, Lisa attacked her, strangled her until she was unconscious, and then used a kitchen knife to cut the baby from her womb. Bobby Jo died at the scene from blood loss. Lisa then kidnapped the newborn girl and drove back to Kansas, presenting the child as her own. Montgomery had a long history of severe mental illness, including complex trauma from years of sexual abuse, physical violence, and childhood neglect. In the months leading up to the murder, she faked a pregnancy, possibly to win back her then husband or gain sympathy from family. Her attorneys argued that she was in the midst of a psychotic break during the murder, suffering from bipolar disorder, PTSD, and dissociative episodes, but prosecutors painted her as manipulative and calculated. In 2007, she was convicted of federal kidnapping resulting in death and sentenced to death. Appeals continued for years, focusing heavily on her mental state. Despite pleas from human rights organizations and mental health advocates, the Trump administration pressed forward with her execution. On January 13, 2021, Lisa Montgomery became the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government in nearly 70 years. Last meal. For her final meal, Lisa requested chicken with gravy, corn, bread, and a soda. The request was modest, comfort food in her final hours before facing execution by lethal injection. Final words. Lisa Montgomery did not offer a formal last statement. When the executioner asked if she had any final words, she softly replied, "No." Witnesses reported that she appeared quiet and disconnected, perhaps sedated or emotionally detached. Her execution sparked international outcry and reignited debate about executing individuals with severe mental illness. For many, Lisa Montgomery's case was not just about crime and punishment. It was a tragic illustration of generational trauma, mental illness, and a justice system grappling with complex human suffering. Kelly Renee Gissendaner. Kelly Renee Gissendaner became the first woman executed in Georgia in over 70 years, and the only woman put to death in the state since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. But what made her case so controversial wasn't just the crime, it was the transformation she claimed to undergo behind bars. In 1997, Kelly was in a rocky, on-again, off-again marriage with Douglas Gissendaner, the father of her 3 children. Instead of divorcing him, Kelly plotted his murder. She manipulated her lover, Gregory Owen, into carrying out the killing. On February 7th, Owen ambushed Douglas, forced him into the woods outside of Atlanta, and brutally stabbed him multiple times. The plan had been orchestrated by Kelly, who gave Owen the go-ahead and even helped cover up the crime afterward. Owen quickly confessed and struck a plea deal in exchange for life in prison. But Kelly, who didn't carry out the murder herself, was sentenced to death for her role in planning it, a decision that sparked fierce debate nationwide. While incarcerated, Kelly became a prison chaplain's assistant, earned a theology degree, and mentored other inmates. Many prison staff, religious leaders, and even some members of the victim's family supported clemency for her. They said she had truly changed and had become a source of hope for other women in the prison system. But despite several delays and global petitions, Georgia upheld her sentence. On September 30th, 2015, Kelly was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson. Last meal. For her final meal, Kelly requested chips with cheese dip, Texas fajita nachos, and a diet frosted lemonade from Chick-fil-A. The meal reflected a bit of Southern comfort, spicy, rich, and indulgent. Final words. In her final moments, Kelly sang the hymn Amazing Grace, a powerful nod to her spiritual rebirth. Her last words were directed to those watching and her children. I just want to say God bless you all, and I love you, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, and I hope through this you get peace and healing. Her execution drew international attention and remains one of the most emotionally charged cases involving a woman on death row. To some, she was a symbol of redemption denied. To others, a reminder that even orchestrating a murder can carry the ultimate price. Teresa Lewis, Virginia. Teresa Lewis's execution in 2010 reignited fierce national debate, not just about the death penalty, but about mental capacity, manipulation, and unequal sentencing. In October 2002, Teresa orchestrated the murder-for-hire plot that would leave both her husband, Julian Lewis, and her 25-year-old stepson, C.J. Lewis, dead in their Pittsylvania County trailer home. Her motive? A combined $250,000 in life insurance, with C.J.'s policy naming Teresa as the sole beneficiary. Teresa began a sexual relationship with one of the men she hired, Matthew Schallenberger, and promised both him and his accomplice, Rodney Fuller, a cut of the insurance money. On the night of the murder, Teresa left the door unlocked for the two gunmen. They entered while the victims were asleep and shot both men at close range. Julian died instantly, while C.J. lingered in pain for hours before dying at the hospital. At trial, Teresa quickly confessed, but what sparked outrage was that she received the death penalty, while the two men who actually pulled the triggers were sentenced to life in prison. Critics argued that Teresa, who had a low IQ of 72, was manipulated by Schallenberger, a man later described as controlling and sadistic. Schallenberger himself admitted in a letter that he had used Teresa to get access to the money. Despite pleas from activists, religious groups, and even Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, in a bizarre diplomatic twist, clemency was denied. Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell upheld her sentence. On September 23, 2010, Teresa Lewis was executed by lethal injection, making her the first woman executed in Virginia in nearly 100 years, and the first woman executed in the U.S. in 5 years. Last meal. Her final meal was classic Southern comfort food, fried chicken, peas with butter, apple pie, and a Dr. Pepper. It was hearty and unpretentious, a quiet moment before her fate was sealed. Final words. As she lay strapped to the gurney, Teresa's final words were filled with remorse and affection. I want everyone to know I love them, and I'm very sorry for what I've done. She died quietly, but her execution left behind questions that still stir controversy today. Did she deserve death more than the killers she hired? Was justice truly served? Or did the system fail someone who may not have fully understood the gravity of her actions? Betty Lou Beets. Betty Lou Beets was no stranger to the law or to tragedy. Born in 1937, her early life was marked by hardship, childhood deafness, sexual abuse, and a string of abusive relationships. But it was what happened in her later years that landed her on Texas death row. In 1983, Betty's fifth husband, Jimmy Don Beets, vanished from their home in Henderson County. She told police he had gone out fishing and never returned. His boat was found floating on Lake Athens with his heart medication inside, an apparent sign of foul play. But no body, no answers. Years passed until a tip led authorities to search her property. That's when the truth surfaced, literally. Investigators discovered Jimmy Don's body buried under a flower bed in her front yard, just a few feet from a decorative wishing well. The remains of another former husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, were later found buried in a garage on the same property. Though Betty was only tried and convicted for Jimmy Don's murder, suspicion swirled around the mysterious deaths and disappearances of multiple men in her life. Prosecutors argued she had a deadly pattern: marry, kill, and collect. Life insurance payouts and pension benefits were central to her motive. But her defenders pointed to decades of domestic abuse, suggesting she may have acted out of self-preservation or trauma. Despite numerous appeals, including pleas highlighting her abusive history and mental health struggles, the courts upheld her sentence. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was the second woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. Last meal. Betty declined the option of a special last meal. Instead, she ate what the prison served that day, a quiet, unremarkable choice that stood in contrast to the drama of her case. Final words. When asked if she had any last words, Betty offered none. She remained silent in her final moments, leaving behind a story that raised difficult questions about justice, survival, and whether the scars of abuse ever fully heal. Her case remains one of the most debated involving women on death row, not just because of the cold-blooded nature of her crimes, but because of the life of pain and violence that came before them. Christina Marie Riggs, Arkansas. Christina Marie Riggs was a former nurse and single mother living in Sherwood, Arkansas, when she committed one of the most heartbreaking crimes in the state's history. On November 4, 1997, Riggs made the decision to take her own life and, in a chilling turn, chose to take her children with her. She gave her two young kids, Justin, 5, and Shelby, 2, a dose of potassium chloride, a drug often used in lethal injections. When the injection failed to kill them quickly, she smothered both children with a pillow as they lay in their beds. Afterward, she attempted suicide by injecting herself with the same drug and taking antidepressants, but survived. Christina left behind a suicide note confessing to the killings and explaining that she couldn't bear to leave her children behind in a cruel world. At her trial, she admitted to everything. Her defense pointed to severe depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicidal ideation, mental health issues worsened by her work as a nurse, and the emotional trauma from a past rape while serving in the military. Despite her fragile mental state, prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing the murders were premeditated and cruel. The jury agreed, and in 1999, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Unusually, Christina did not appeal her sentence. She refused to fight her execution, saying she wanted to die. On May 2, 2000, Christina Riggs became the first woman executed in Arkansas in over 150 years. Last meal. For her final meal, Christina requested a chef's salad with French dressing, banana pudding, and Kool-Aid. A simple, almost nostalgic meal, one that might have reminded her of ordinary times before everything fell apart. Final words. Moments before her execution, Christina offered a quiet, heartbreaking statement. "There is no way, no words to express how sorry I am." Her case left many divided. Some saw her as a cold-blooded murderer. Others viewed her as a deeply broken woman, failed by the system. What remains undeniable is the tragedy that unfolded in that small Arkansas home, 2 young lives lost, and a mother who saw no way out. Wanda Jean Allen, Oklahoma. Wanda Jean Allen was the first black woman executed in the United States in the 21st century, and her case continues to stir controversy due to serious concerns about her mental capacity and troubled life history. Born in 1959 in Oklahoma, Wanda Jean grew up in poverty and faced a lifetime of trauma. At age 12, she was hit by a truck and suffered lasting brain damage. Later evaluations suggested she had an IQ of about 69, placing her in the range of intellectual disability, though this was never fully explored during her trial. She also endured a chaotic upbringing marked by abuse, instability, and emotional neglect. In 1981, Wanda was convicted of manslaughter in the death of a former girlfriend. She served a short sentence and was released. But in 1988, she was arrested again, this time for the shooting death of her partner, Gloria Jean Leathers, outside an Oklahoma City police station. The two had a volatile, abusive relationship. On the day of the murder, they had been in a heated argument. Wanda claimed she acted in self-defense, but the jury didn't buy it. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. What made the case so controversial was what the jury didn't know: Wanda's mental impairments, history of head trauma, and neurological damage were never presented during trial. Later appeals cited these omissions, sparking pleas for clemency from mental health advocates, religious leaders, and even international human rights groups. Still, the Oklahoma courts refused to intervene. On January 11, 2001, Wanda Jean Allen was executed by lethal injection, becoming the first woman executed in Oklahoma since statehood in 1907 and the first black woman executed in the U.S. since 1954. Her last meal was hearty and comforting: 2 pieces of fried chicken, 2 sandwiches, peach pie, and a cherry Coke. A familiar and soulful Southern spread, it was perhaps a small moment of peace before her final hour. In her last moments, Wanda Jean turned to the witnesses and spoke with clarity and emotion. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Her words echoed the voice of forgiveness and perhaps defiance. Today, Wanda Jean Allen's execution is often cited in discussions about capital punishment and the mentally impaired, and whether justice was truly served in her case. Executions of women on death row are rare but unforgettable. Behind every final meal and whispered last word is a life full of pain, rage, regret, or sometimes chilling calm. Whether driven by desperation, manipulation, or cold calculation, their stories remind us that the road to the death chamber is never simple. Which of these stories left you stunned? Let us know in the comments. If this video gripped your attention, hit that subscribe button for more chilling true crime content. Click the like button to support our work, and share this video with friends who can't resist a good true crime deep dive. We've got more stories coming that you don't want to miss. Thanks for watching.